Okay, now we're going to go through a demo of a Flexbox example, and it's very simple, but it just gives you the base foundation of what Flexbox is. So we could go through this code and just show you how to use Flexbox in a style sheet, and that will be the introduction to Angular Flex layout module, which you really don't use the style sheet. You really just use Angular and Flex and directives to lay out your component templates in containers. Okay, so let's start simply. Okay, you have a sky blue parent. I'm going to call it it's a div tag. It's styled in a certain way. I have a class where I style it in my style sheet, and I say it's display flex. And the reason why I do that, I'm going to throw a bunch of items in there, whether they're buttons or whatever they may be. In this case, I think they're div tags. And I want my parent container, the sky blue box, to float my items appropriately. So this is what I want. And I also want to be able to change the viewport size and have the items still float nicely within my container. So that's the goal, okay? And of course, I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible, but I'll just go in the style sheet and change parameters, and I'll show you how that changes my look and feel. But first, let's take a little look at the code. And so let's talk about what the code looks like, okay? So I do have an app module in Angular, and it just it's a class for my application. It bootstraps a root component. That's really all you need to know. The file is relatively simple. And in my component, I just have a class where I define a title, and I'm not even displaying that title. So in reality, when I go and I start up the server, it's going to display this Angular app in my browser, and really all it does is it's going to show my app component in an index.html, and this is what I have in the template. It's a div class container, my container, and inside that I have some floating items. Okay, it's simple enough. And we just saw the view of this. It's item 1, item 2, item 3 floating in this sky blue box. So let's take a look at the style, okay? Now, the style sheet is here, but just keep in mind I've got an outer div tag which has one class, my container, and I have a smaller div, other inside nested div tags which have a class, my item. So first, let's look at the style sheet to see what the style sheet looks like. Okay, so the first thing we do with the my container, we say, okay, we want this to be display flex, and so that's basically what we want to do. And I put the height of this to be 80 pixels, and beware, sometimes if the height is auto, it'll automatically stretch with the items inside of it. So if I change the flex direction to column, it'll display properly. But let's just quickly look at some attributes here. My background is light sky blue. My height is 80 pixels, and my width is 100%. My flex direction is row. Okay, so we just looked at that. You see item 1, item 2, item 3, and I justify the content by saying put a space around them. And I line the items in the center, and this attribute is really looking at the cross axis from top to bottom. So we'll take a look at that as well. Now, instead of looking right now at the my item style, which basically is a display flex 2, let's go and take a look at the main container attributes and see what happens when I change some of these attributes. Okay, so we're here looking at a row direction, and I put space around the items. So there's space around these items. Okay, so let's take a look at changing some of these attributes. What happens when I say space between Okay, my items get spread out more. It's spaced between, so it looks a little different. Now notice my item is aligning up with the box here. So that can be changed by just putting some padding or some margin around that item. And so we don't do that, but we have that style right here, the margin. So let's do that. Let's put a 5 pixel here, just to see how that changes things. Okay, so now I have a little bit more padding there. Okay, so let's do this. Let's make it 10 pixels. And now it's starting to look a little bit better to me if I wanted to space those out more. And just remember, I could put more items in here and have it look like from left to right, you know, spaced out. So basically, you know, that's the space between, and I like space around better. But let's suppose I did this and I just said space left. Let's see what would happen. Okay, now my items are aligned left. And keep in mind that I put a margin around these items to be 10 pixels. So this space here really is the margin. And you know, so the first thing you see when you try these things is if you have no margin in the item container, you'll see this, which, I mean, who wants to look at that, right? So we put the 10 pixels here. Now let's do something else. Let's, of course, you could do a right here. So let's go back and let's put the space around again. Notice it'll show you all the different possibilities: space between, center, flex end, flex start. So let's just do this real quick and see what happens real quick. Okay, so once again, I have my space around. Now I also have my margins around my items. But if I went in here and I said, okay, align items, I'm going to just say start. Let's see if that works. Okay, notice they got shoved to the top, but my margin saved the day there, right? So once again, I notice my margin, if it's 0 on this the container, the child containers, what I would see is something like this, which once again, I don't really care for it, but you might need it. Okay, and of course, I could put end here as well, and basically what I would see is it's having a little bit of trouble. So what I do which is kind of funny, is it really should be flex end and flex start. So I'm going to just do that here and just show you what might happen. Okay, so now it's going shifting downward. Okay, so basically probably what we're looking at is, you know, different versions of Flex, Box, different versions of the browser. I just looked up the documentation, and the bottom line is you should really use the Flex End, Flex Start, but I'll take a closer look to see what the proper thing is, because I mean there is a Flex Center, and meanwhile center is working properly. Okay, so now let's take a look at another thing. Notice how my items are ordered 1, 2, 3. I could go in here and say flex direction row reverse, and what I'll see is the items changing. item 3, item 2, item 1. And you could do that with the column as well. Okay, so let's just see what might happen if I turn this into column. Okay, so that's not good. So what I have to do is I have to go back and say my height is auto. Okay, and what will happen is this sky blue height will dynamically change. And of course, the goal behind all of this, and you'll see at the Flex Layout module and Angular, we'll have this concept of breakpoints, and so does Flex and style sheets. But I won't get into it too much. But so the goal with this particular demo, because we're just learning Flex, but the goal is the display and row orientation until the viewport changes size, then show it in column. So I'm not going to get too much into that. Let me just go back and revert my changes here. Okay. So now I'm back to looking at my display here. Item 1, item 2, item 3. Okay, so so you can play around with these things, and there's other attributes. Notice the my item container is being used for all the div tags for my children. And so I could also do what I need to do with them. I background the color differently. I have a width here. We could try getting rid of that just to see what happens. See that's not good. If I did this and did maybe auto, let's see if that does anything for me. And then I find myself having to do certain things which I find a little bit troubling. So let's go back to leaving that 100 pixels. I've got the display flex. Notice if I don't do this, let's see what happens. Align items, that's associated with the vertical axis. So suppose I do put a start here. Let's see if that changes anything. Okay, notice the text inside the div tag is now starting here. So you'll find that as soon as you put these items in a Flex container, you'll say, well, wait a minute. It's aligning my items properly, but what happened to inside the items? Well, it turns out you have to flex that too, and you have to align them properly. Let's see if end works here, because it didn't. Let's see if flex works here, because it had trouble with the main parent container. Yeah, it doesn't work here either. So what we'll do is do the align items and put a flex end here as well. And now it's going towards the bottom. So when I did a start, it worked. Let's see, flex start. It's on the tippy top. Okay, so let's go back and just change this to center, although it probably should be flex center, but let's just make sure that compiled, transpiled. So we're back to where we started. Okay, so that's just some examples on how to use Flex. You can order them. I find this to be a little bit confusing. Probably my lack of knowledge with style sheets, but let's face it, there's room for everyone to specialize in certain things. Right now I'm using Flex Layout Module, and I'm using Ionic, and there's a lot of things you just don't have to worry about, and under the covers there's Flex being used. Material design is really a good framework that I use. Okay, so I don't think there's really anything else I do want to show you here. Because it's really just a foundation class for introducing the Flex Layout module.